So I'm Paul Resnikoff, publisher of Digital Music News, and the topic I selected to talk about is the young person's guide to getting into the music industry, advice I would give my younger self when I was first getting into the music business. So Digital Music News is a publication that all we talk about is the music industry. We talk about the art of it, the business of it, the disputes of it, every element of the business we cover, from live concerts to recording to publishing. And along the way, I started to familiarize myself with every nuance of the business. And I wish that when I started in the business myself, I had known about all these different nuances. And I almost wish every young person that goes through a music business program or is interested in getting in the music industry could have the same knowledge, because the options are enormous. The business is much bigger than most people think. The money is a lot bigger than most people think. The opportunities are a lot larger. And some of the obvious choices that people make end up, I think, slowing people down, because people tend to go for a lot of the same opportunities because everyone's sort of going for the same companies or sectors. So what I hope to do is just convey some information about the industry and stuff I've learned, and hopefully it can be helpful to people. The first thing I want to talk about is becoming an artist. So the first thing I say to anyone who wants to become an artist is to go for it. I don't want to just say go for it. I want to say to fucking go for it. Like, you have to go for it. There's no way that it works if you're kind of going, 50 miles per hour in the middle lane. You really have to be going full blast, left lane, pedal to the metal. And it's either going to work or it's not. And if it doesn't, you almost want to push so hard that you know that it didn't work and that you gave it everything. That's my philosophy on this. Sometimes that means going through 10 years of just no traction, nothing happening, nothing working, and then something happens. You see it happen all the time in the arts. So you see it happen in music, in film, TV, visual arts. Just take it to an extreme. I mean, there are some of the most famous visual artists never received any acclaim in their lives at all, and only receive acclaim afterwards. That's also true for some famous classical composers as well. Their real fame came after they died. So you kind of have to look at that in the big picture, like, how badly do you want that? And I think if you want it badly enough, you have to understand that it could go to 11, you can have the most successful career, and I wish that upon any artist. Or maybe it doesn't, but really it doesn't work unless it's just absolutely 1,000%. So that was always kind of my advice to artists. The last thing I would say on that is every famous artist basically started out as someone you wouldn't recognize walking down the street. So you go to a show, there's 60,000 people screaming for a band, an artist, DJ, whatever. At one point, that was just a person. Okay, still a person, just a very famous one, but didn't have any notoriety, struggling, wasn't sure of the next steps, wasn't sure if were going to have that connection, knew they had talent or something like that. So when you dial it back, there's always somebody that started almost 100% of the time in sort of humble roots. So that's important to consider. And then there are also a lot of signals along the way. So if you're talented, people are going to notice that. You're going to get praise. If you're able to connect with an audience, which is critical, you're going to feel that. You're going to feel that at some level, and it's going to keep you going. So there are signposts along the way. It just doesn't happen overnight. What kind of musician are we talking about here? It's another really interesting question. Do you want to be the next Taylor Swift? Okay. Do you want to be the next The Weeknd? Got it. I understand. Those are huge stars, enormous personalities and celebrities, and that's a goal. I understand. But that's not the only kind of successful artist. Okay, so there are producers who are enormously successful that you would never really hear. I mean, there are ultra famous producers like Metro Boomin, for example. Like, everybody knows Metro Boomin, right? But there are many, many producers that have achieved great success, great artistic success, won awards, financial success, and they just don't have the fame or mainstream notoriety. So think about that. And that can change. Sometimes a producer who isn't as well known is doing well and then comes to the fore, or maybe their profile isn't as big, but it's something to consider, because if you're a fantastic producer, then you're able to work with a lot of different artists. It's not as important what you look like, how old you are, whether your audience is aged out. None of these factors are as important, though they are important, but not as important if you're not the frontline artist. So just one way to think about that. Then, are you working in a support capacity? So do you have some sort of, are you an instrumentalist, for example? So let's pretend you are going to be supporting a major artist as a guitarist on tour. Okay, so now the game is a little bit different. The game is absolute virtuosity. Like you must be an absolutely incredible performer. You also have to be able to tour a lot, travel on the road. The lifestyle is going to be really demanding. You have to have the look, you have to look right, but it's mainly about your chops, being able to play effectively within a group. You really have to be a top-notch performer, and you have to practice a lot and make sure you're in top shape and top form. Very different than being the front line, let's say Lana Del Rey, who's the personality, and it doesn't mean she's not incredibly talented and rehearsed and practiced either, but the game becomes slightly different in that regard. But also another fantastic way to make it as an artist. I would say in almost all of these situations, it's not an easy path, simply because the demands that are put on artists are extremely unconventional and difficult to deal with, I guess, in a conventional way. So if you're really killing it as an artist, you're probably on the road a lot, you're in the studio a lot, you're doing interviews a lot. If you have a level of fame, it's hard to go outside a lot. So even if you look at the most famous artists in the world, take Taylor Swift, for example, that's not an easy lifestyle. Okay, that is not an easy lifestyle. And even if you retreat and you take time off, there's a lot of pressure to that. So The Weeknd has multiple houses in Los Angeles. Well, his security guard just got shot, and there's just all kinds of drama and craziness that goes with that. So think about the lifestyle too. It's not for everyone, I'll say that. And then there's other aspects. What genre are we talking about? Are we in classical? Okay, well, classical is like a completely different game. So classical, of course, is about your virtuosic level, absolutely. Orchestras are audition-based. In all of these categories, there's absolutely room at the top. But the lifestyle of the principal cellist of the LA Phil is going to be very different than Lil Uzi Vert playing at Coachella, because a very different kind of artist. Both successful, very successful artists, incredibly different. Financial security can be very difficult in the arts. If you're at the top 0.1%, not so much, okay? It could be wonderful. But even for artists you view as being successful, there can be a financial struggle there. Okay, a band, 4 or 5 people doing okay, well, they have to split that money. If there's managers, labels, other entities in, that's more money to split. Sometimes a career goes pretty well for a couple of years, but then it dies out, or the lead singer has a drug problem, or maybe you're just not as hot anymore. There's always another group coming out. I've actually witnessed bands do very well, extremely well for a period, then not so well, and then do well again. It's just so strange. Sometimes a group will do well in the United States, then they're not so hot there, but they have a decent following, they keep it going, and then they'll have a huge following in Latin America. It's just, you never really know. There's a lot of ups and downs. Most careers that are successful do have a certain peak, a moment where they're sort of in their prime, and then it's a question of what happens afterwards. Does that career kind of fizzle out and it's hard to tour? There are a lot of artists that had huge names decades ago and have audiences but can't really effectively tour. There are others that are still popular, that can do pretty well. So there's going to be an ebb and flow to things, and that's can be difficult. So it's not as steady financially, psychologically, emotionally. One of the biggest things about, I think, being a successful artist is to recognize that it's not just about the music. So much of it is about the personality connection, your cultural connection, who you are, where you are in a scene. A lot of artists are in a scene. They know a lot of artists, other artists, and that's sort of how things happen. It's not just about the music. If I were to just plop into Los Angeles from Sandusky, Ohio, and I can play guitar really well, I may not have a connection as much with the local audience here, just to sort of create an obvious example. So if you have a connection, that's an enormous part of what success is, I think, in the arts and in music. That can lead to going viral. That can lead to a song taking off. There's a lot more that people are reacting to than just the notes and just the song itself. So if you have that connection and you have a strong connection, and there are examples of artists with enormously strong connections with their audience, I would just say, go with that. Ride that train. You have a gift that's very special. Then I always get the question of, should I sign with a label or should I sign with a publisher? And on that note, that's very hard to give, very, very hard to give advice on. I guess there's some truisms that come out of that, and I always think, well, I always say leverage is nice in any negotiation. The more leverage you have, the better. So if Warner Music Group says, hey, we love what you're doing. You're the hottest DJ, want to sign you, okay? Just creating an example. And I said, well, I already have hundreds of millions of streams on Spotify. Let's talk. That's a much different conversation than, oh yeah, I have a few thousand streams on Spotify. Much different conversation. Or my followers on TikTok are much larger. If they're smaller, I'm going to have less leverage. Then there's the question of, well, what could a label actually give you? So in many cases, they can blow you up, and that's great. And I just say, my feeling is sometimes just go for it. Do the deal, because it's better to take the resources, work within the label, have them promote. You have experts, you have money, you have resources. And then I think one of the challenges is to work effectively within the label to make it a success. But one of the things I also wish I really knew going into the industry is just how many different subsectors and micro industries exist within the music industry. So the music industry is worth tens of billions of dollars, and there are just so many different areas that people cannot see from the surface. It seems that everyone who's getting into the music industry, they want that plum job at Spotify, or they want to work for Warner Music Group, or trying to think of what it would be. Okay, you want to be an organizer for Coachella or something like that. Like, these are the obvious choices that people gravitate towards. And of course, these are really difficult jobs to get for that reason. But if you dig deeper, you realize, like, wow, there's so many different sectors at play here. When it comes to labels, there are innumerable labels. There are major labels, there are indie labels, there are labels with 3 people, there are labels with 3,000 people. There's so many different options to get into the recording side. Publishing is another enormous industry that has always been around for decades and decades and decades. It's older than the recording industry, but now it's become more valuable than ever. There's so much more action within publishing, and it's a very complicated and nuanced business. It behaves quite differently than the recording. And there's a lot is not so well known to the public about it, but once you dig into publishing, you realize, wow, there are different licenses, streams, there's performance licenses, there are PROs that collect over $1 billion a year in the United States, and there's multiple versions of that. There are companies that focus on another completely different kind of license. It gets really complicated, but all of these companies need really talented, good people to help them figure out how to administer these licenses, the complexities of it. So these layers, I think, should be always investigated, because there's a lot of nuances out there. And I just wrote down so many of the different subsectors of the business that exist. Beyond recording, I talked about publishing. Live touring is an enormous and unbelievably robust industry right now. Live touring includes venues, ticketing, companies like Live Nation, AEG, the touring companies themselves, promoters, festivals. It's an absolutely enormous business. So something that should be thought about. Sync licensing. Sync licensing is every time you watch something on Netflix, there's going to be music to it. Someone had to sync that. That's an entirely different kind of license. There are entire companies, there's an entire industry that just works on that. So yet another, the legal industry, music industry, there are so many legal challenges. Every deal has a contract. There are lawyers that need to manage that. It's not just a contract with a label, it's a contract with publishers, it's live touring contracts, it's disputes that come up, it's copyright debates, it's policy on Capitol Hill. So there's an enormous industry just focused on music law. Artist management is another one. And I'm just rattling these off just to give people ideas because there is so much. Genres, and all these genres right now are in such an amazing spot in the music industry in which different genres are just exploding in a way they never have before. I'm going off on this. Hopefully I'm helping people consider their options artistically. And also, I don't want to discourage any artists from going for it. I really want to encourage people to go for it because you just don't know what's going to happen. If anyone's watching this and they have additional questions, just email me, paul@digitalmusicnews.com. I love to talk.